Sanibonani, Molweni. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Manga Mutukulula. I am a Human Factors Ergonomics specialist and the Managing Director of Smart Ergonomics, which is a consultancy that specializes in railway human factors ergonomic services. I welcome you all to this webinar, where we will be discussing how human factors ergonomics is the missing link for advancing and sustaining railway operations on the African continent. This is the first webinar in the series that will be conducted under the Railway Human Factors Ergonomics Capacity Building program that has been initiated by Smart Ergonomics. We are excited at the response this webinar has received from a variety of people and organizations from South Africa, the rest of the continent, and beyond. This international response is testament to the fact that this topic is top of mind and timeless. At the outset, I would like to indicate that I will be using the acronym HFE to denote Human Factors Ergonomics during the course of my presentation. Over the course of the next hour or so, we will be discussing the African railway industry with a particular focus on railway occurrences, the HFE contributory factors that lead to these occurrences, and the legal and regulatory framework for the management of HFE in the railway industry. We will also offer a brief overview of the Railway Human Factors Ergonomics Capacity Building Program, as well as the upcoming HFE webinars in this series that you may be interested in attending. Please take note of the following house rules. The chat box, which you will see on the right side of your screen, can be used to ask questions or to make comments during the course of the presentation. You are encouraged to submit your questions throughout the presentation so that they can be addressed during the course of the webinar. Be sure to mark them with a Q so that they stand out from the general comments. We will also be sending some polls to you during the course of the webinar, like the one that is currently in your chat box now. We would like to know, what are your expectations for this webinar? Please cast your vote now. We encourage you to participate in all the polls that you will be receiving. All you need to do is select or click one answer when the polls are presented. Participation in the polls is completely anonymous, and the aggregated results of the responses to the polls will be published in the chat box. If you experience any technical challenges, please do let us know in the chat box. If these persist, please press the reconnect button at the top of the screen, and it will automatically reconnect you. We hope that you will enjoy the webinar, and we look forward to interacting with you further during the webinar as well as afterwards. In recent times, there has been a call to move from road to rail on the continent. This agenda is supported by research and analyses conducted by various strategic stakeholders, including international development organizations and governments. According to the statistics provided in the African Development Bank and the UIC reports, the total railway network size on the African continent is 82,000 kilometers, with 35 of the 54 countries having operational railway networks. From the map, you will see that there are several countries with no railway networks, and there's also quite a few where the networks are regarded as being poor. Some of these are closed or are regarded as not being suitable for use due to natural disasters and general neglect, as well as a lack of resources to maintain and operate them. It has thus been estimated that the African railway industry is only 84% operational. You'll see on the graph on the top right that the South African railway network is regarded as the biggest on the continent, with an estimate of over 22,000 kilometers of track. So the railways in Africa are used similarly to the rest of the world for the mass transit of freight and passengers. you'll see that Northern Africa, so at the bottom left, on the bottom left graph, Northern African railways dominate railway passenger transport on the continent. Contrary to that, the South African railway network is responsible for most of the railway freight transport activities on the continent. The overall volume carried by rail on the continent is said to be approximately 200 billion unit kilometers. 30% of this is passenger transport, and the other 70% is freight. This translates to only 2% of the global railway traffic, and therefore places Africa last in terms of performance for this indicator when compared to other continents. And therefore, as a consequence, the road sector in the African continent accounts for 80 to 90% of total traffic volume, according to estimates. And this places an ever-increasing strain on road infrastructure. Another appealing argument that has been presented for moving from road to rail is the cost of rail compared to other modes of transport. This graph is from the 2015 African Development Bank report. It reflects European data on the cost of rail compared to other modes of transport. With regards to air pollution, the graph on your left indicates that electrified rail operations caused less air pollution when compared to cars and buses. Diesel-operated rail operations, which most African countries predominantly use, do not have the same cost benefit when it comes to air pollution. I would like us to focus on the cost associated with accidents. The red circles on the graph on the left indicate the cost of accidents when cars, buses, and motorcycles are considered. All of these forms of road modes of road transport are substantially higher than the cost associated with accidents in electric and diesel-operated railway operations, as well as aviation, of course, and all of these are marked by the green circles on the graph. Similar effects in terms of the cost of accidents were observed when only freight transport accident-related costs were compared. So this makes a compelling argument from an accident-related cost perspective that rail would be the preferred mode of transport over road, but in the European context. So the question is, would these railway benefits be the same in the African context? Well, data on the parameters for the African railway industry are not publicly available, if they are actually even in place. However, we know that African railways are predominantly diesel operated, and we also know that our railways are plagued by a high number of accidents compared to the European context. Therefore, it can be inferred that the African trends may be different when it comes to cost of accidents and air pollution and the rest. In the next couple of slides, I will qualify what I mean when I say our African railways are plagued by accidents. Okay, if you, excuse me, if you were to search railway accidents in the African countries on the internet, you will encounter a lot of reports and news articles describing a variety of accidents of different magnitudes. While some of these date back, decades, you will also find that there's some which are barely a few days old. Railway accidents are obviously not unique to the African condition. However, the difference is that the difference it seems is the sheer number of railway accidents and the fact that most of the worst of these, in terms of the fatalities that results from the accidents, have come out from our continent. It would thus be amiss to discuss the development of African railways without addressing the issue of railway accidents. Ensuring the safety of railway operations is critical to preventing the loss of lives. But from a business perspective, it also is important because they have a direct bearing on the efficiency and reliability of railway operations. And that is why the focus of this presentation is specifically on railway occurrences, because they seem to have been not given as much attention in discussions about the development of African railways. It is important, before we continue, that I clarify this term occurrences. Some people will use mainly accidents, and others are not sure what's the difference between accident and incidents. So occurrences encompass both accidents and incidents, and that's how we're going to be, when we refer to occurrences in this presentation, we are referring to both accidents and incidents. So accidents are essentially unexpected events that can lead to serious injury or death of persons, or even damage of property. Railway examples of accidents include train collisions, people struck by trains, train fires, derailments, and the like. Incidents are also unexpected events that happen when, despite the fact that there might be some controls in place to try and prevent them. They do not always necessarily lead to serious injury or death. And what is quite interesting about incidents, unlike accidents, which are in full view of everyone to see and observe, sometimes incidents may go undetected. In some instances, even when they are detected, they may go unreported by those who see them or observe them. Incidents may may occur on a daily basis, and they are as a result of unsafe acts, behaviors, as well as conditions. And what we know for sure is that incidents, if they are not managed accordingly, they become the building blocks for accidents. And railway examples of incidents will include things like averted collisions, signals past a danger, what we call SPADs, as well as unauthorized train movements. This diagram also illustrates the relationship between accidents and incidents, the incidents that precede them. What the graph or the graphic tries to explain is that for every accident that leads to serious injury or death, one can expect that there could be 300 near misses that will happen in the system, or rather, and 3,000 unsafe acts, behaviors, and conditions, all of which could end up breeding further accidents. And so, the more accidents we have in our railway industries, it can be expected that the risk of our operations is actually going to be high. And therefore, the likelihood of more accidents happening is very high. So sustainable and safe railways necessitate that we reduce occurrences. This is critical. And it means that a reduction of accidents can only be done by reducing the incidents. And therefore, based on the link between railway accidents and human factors ergonomics deficiencies, as the statistics which will be provided later in this presentation, it makes quite a strong argument for reducing railway accidents through the implementation and integration of human factors ergonomics into the safety management system of railway operations. But of course, this is not all doom and gloom for the African railways. It has been argued that the growing urbanization and industrialization in the African continent poses new transport challenges, which can most suitably handled by railways. In line with this, there are already a number of African countries that are embarking on large-scale projects to revive the railway industries. Examples include the expansion of railway networks in Kenya, the introduction of new rolling stock, such as passenger trains in Egypt and even in South Africa, the increase in local manufacturing capacity for locomotives, as we are seeing in South Africa with one of the passenger rail operators. And one of the most exciting ones, anyway, in my opinion, are discussions about the introduction of a high-speed rail network that will traverse the countries within the continent. And as you'll see on this slide, those are not the only ones. There's more. There's more that's happening in Ghana. There's more that's happening in Cameroon, in Madagascar, all over the continent. We are seeing efforts to revive the railway industries. I would like to redirect your attention to this map, which is a representation of the density of railway networks in different countries around the world. The map allows us to compare countries with similar network densities. However, it does not account for or make or distinguish when it comes to differences in railway infrastructure, rolling stock, for example. It does, and as well as pairway systems. It does not distinguish between railway networks that are used. It does not distinguish between differences in socioeconomic conditions in developed and developing countries, and other material differences that would need to be accounted for us to make a proper comparison. And so the comparisons that we'll be making are admittedly limited because we cannot control for all of these material differences. Another point of another disclaimer is that the data that we are able to actually compare is limited. So some of the verified data is available is country-based or at a country level, and other data that is available that has been verified is for regions or even continents. In some regions, verified data for railway occurrences is not even publicly available, and therefore we only have unverified statistics from sources such as news articles, as you will see with some of the stats that I have for India. Another limitation is that the classification of documented occurrences is not always the same. So, for example, in South Africa or even in the UK, we when we are reporting on occurrence statistics, we talk about the number of occurrences in different categories. However, in China, in the US, they mainly report on the recorded fatalities resulting from these occurrences. So it becomes a bit difficult to make comparisons to some of these areas. Incidentally, though, the safety management system requirements and the classification of railway occurrences in some developing countries like South Africa and a little bit in India as well, they're based on the European requirements and standards. So this enables us to make comparisons when it comes to some of these railway statistics, as you will see. So I know I've been making quite a lot of disclaimers, but this is important because I need you to understand where the numbers are coming from. All right, so although the comparisons are not an exact science, they offer insights into the state of safety of railways around the world as far as documented occurrences are concerned. So in 2019, Canada recorded 1,246 rail accidents. Train accidents were recorded to be a total of 517 in the 2018-19 financial year for all of the countries. I think there's 5 countries in the UK at the moment because Brexit hasn't happened. But who knows what's going to happen in the future. But anyway, so the European train accident statistics indicated that the continent had the most, which has the most dense networks, had a combined 1,746 significant train accidents in 2018. This is similar in terms of the numbers to the Canadian statistics, although of course it's a country versus a group of countries, but also Canada has a different density in terms of its network. The UIC reported that the number of human factors related causal factors for European accidents was 4% in 2019. This was down from 8% in the previous year. To give you some perspective, human factors contributory causes to accidents in the aviation industry, which, by the way, is regarded as one of the safest modes of transport, has been estimated to be around 70%. And this, of course, is despite the fact that in this industry, there's very stringent requirements for the management of human factors ergonomics in the operations. Interestingly, the number of railway accidents in Egypt was 1,793 in 2017. And this, as we've already seen, is comparable to the Canadian statistics, which also has a similar kind of network density, according to the report. Occurrences in India were based on unverified data, unfortunately. India was an interesting comparison because they're also a developing nation, and they have a similar network density to South Africa. But of course, the data is unverified. And according to this unverified data, they said that between 2013 and 2018, there was an average of 110 accidents in India on the railway networks per year. The Indian network is similar in density, of course, as I said, to the South African network. And our network in South Africa has been reported to have 3,990 occurrences in the 2018-19 year. Of these accidents, 66.7% were estimated to be associated with human factors contributory causes. But what are these 3,990 occurrences comprised of? So the top 5 occurrences reported by the rail regulator in terms of the different categories were collisions, fires, platform train interface accidents, derailments, and people struck by train occurrences. This profile, of course, is quite different to what you will see in the European context, where the profile is completely different to what we have in South Africa. But we're not going to get into that now. So while the rail regulator in South Africa reported that 66.7% of these occurrences had human factors ergonomics related contributory factors, they did not, unfortunately, stratify these in terms of the percentage for the different occurrence categories. What we have started doing at Smart Ergonomics is trying to undergo the process of delineating the human factors ergonomics contributory causes that are associated with railway occurrences. Through an initial analysis of occurrence investigations, we have found evidence that suggests that all of the occurrence categories are actually impacted by human factors ergonomics factors. We had to confirm this because usually there are certain occurrences where in the industry generally they say, no, that's an infrastructure issue only. One of those sometimes is derailments, which are notorious for, usually they're being attributed to, infrastructure issues. But we're finding that through our analysis that actually human factors issues are prevalent even in what is considered mainly infrastructure related occurrences. So an example of some of the results we found during the analysis of these occurrences is that human factors contributory causes, for example, in collisions. There's certain factors that feature, quite often in these occurrences. This includes high mental workload, poor shift design, which is leading to unmanaged fatigue risks. Also, work-induced fatigue from inadequate work rest intervals is coming up quite regularly. Communication errors emanating from inadequate procedures and poorly designed communication equipment is also coming up quite regularly. The loss of situation awareness, which is caused by a myriad of factors such as distraction, such as information overload, such as inadequate application of non-technical skills to cope with multiple and simultaneous demands is also coming up. And related to this, the issue of divided attention requirements that are placed on workers who are performing safety critical tasks. And they have to do those concurrently, but they're using the same limited mental resources. So, contrary to popular commentary and belief within the railway industry that human error is the cause of these accidents, evidence is suggesting that workers and users of railway systems are not usually to blame for these occurrences. Instead, it is the unmanaged human factors ergonomics contributory factors predominantly, not the only ones, but predominantly, which are essentially a reflection of the deficiencies in the rail safety management systems within rail operations. These are at the core of why railway occurrences are happening. They are an indication that the work requirements and demands placed on workers and users are not aligned to their capabilities and limitations. Therefore, what we see as errors, as strain, as injuries, as reduced efficiencies of output that are caused by a mismatch essentially between worker capabilities and work demands within the rail systems, they are evidence that there are that human factors is actually not adequately integrated into railway safety management systems. And of course, this is going to be a threat to the efficiency and the safety of railway operations and on the users of these systems. And I will demonstrate this shortly. I hope you are I hope you are following as we are going through this. And I know some of these views might be seemingly contentious for those who are not within the human factors ergonomic space, but we'll hopefully get to a resolution by the end of the presentation. So I'll give you a bit of background into the accident, and then I'll play a video, and hopefully the sound is going to work. Please confirm in the chats. And then from then on, we're going to talk about some of the human factors contributory causes which are that are prevalent in that accident. All right. So please remember the question for the poll is, do you think the train driver involved in this accident was to blame or was responsible for the accident? And your answers are either going to be yes, no, or you are not sure.
Debe de haber heridos muchos, porque está volcado, no puedo salir de cabina.
This is the phone call made by the driver of a high-speed train minutes after it crashed in Spain. Francisco Garzon's in shock. His voice is shaky and he is gasping for breath as he surveys the wreckage in Santiago de Compostela.
Sí, porque es que la tenía en verde y me despisté y ¿cómo se llama? Y tenía que pasar a 80 y pasé a 190, una cosa así. Vale. Es que eso ya lo dije a de seguridad, ya que eso era peligroso, que un día nos íbamos a despistar y nos lo íbamos a tragar.
While admitting straight away he was going well over the speed limit, the driver says he had already complained the curve in the track wasn't safe.
Ay, Dios mío. Pero eso ya se lo tenía dicho al de seguridad, que eso era muy peligroso. Somos humanos y se nos puede pasar. Es que eso es inhumano, esta curva. Dios mío, pobres viajeros. Ojalá no haya ningún muerto.
Garzon hasn't talked about this in court, where he is charged with the homicide of 79 people and numerous offences of bodily harm. The revealing audio released by the Spanish daily El País bolsters the serious questions over signalling and security systems on the country's high-speed network, and whether anything was done between the complaint and the crash.
The driver of the train said he suffered a momentary lapse of concentration and didn't know his location. He spoke with staff at the train company Renfe about the train route, and sounds in the call suggest he consulted a map or other documents. Minutes before the crash, the train reached a speed of 192 kilometers per hour. The brakes were activated shortly before the collision, but the train entered the curve at 153 kilometers per hour, almost twice the speed limit.
So essentially from the two videos, we get a perspective from the driver's side of what could have been happening as this accident was happening. And based on that, we can then try to understand what are some of the the human factors ergonomics contributory causes. And this, by the way, is mainly based on what the clips, or the information that the clips provided. In the first instance, he indicates that he was, driving the train and he had exceeded the speed limit. And that essentially became the biggest narrative around this occurrence, that he was to blame because he exceeded the speed limit. We'll come back to that when we're talking about one of the other human factors contributory causes. One of the other issues that comes out that emerges from this accident from a human factors perspective is that the driver was distracted. he was dividing his attention between several different critical tasks. So he was on the phone, communicating with someone. He was, or he should have been, monitoring the speed and some of the other issues in the cabin. He should also have been, aware of the fact that 4 kilometers down the line, the train has to stop because there's a station coming up where the passengers would have to disembark and others would be onboarding. So the issue of divided attention speaks to the design of the task, the design of the systems that he is using, and the way that that whole setup is constructed. And then related to this as well, another human factors issue that emerges is the interaction between the way the curve around which this train derailed as it was approaching the bend in relation to train handling requirements. So the drivers would have been trained on what these are, but also in relation to the multiple task demands that this driver has to basically manage as he approaches the curve. So within the space of human factors ergonomics, we try to understand not one issue at a time, but how all of these elements are interacting to cause a mismatch between or a match or a mismatch between the worker's capabilities as well as the task demands. Other issues, as I've already mentioned, is the design of the curve. Why is no one questioning the fact that the way that this is designed is already causing potential issues or a mismatch between the way that the task can be performed in this particular area of the network? Another issue that came up is that although the identification and reporting of risks was done by this driver and other colleagues of his, and this was reported to the safety department, they say in the video, it seems that no action was taken. So they had already indicated that as workers, as users of the system, they can identify a risk, but no one did anything about it. And so this is also indicative of a negative safety culture. And it also shows just how this can have an influence on the management of risks before the accident, but also even after the accident, especially because no one is asking about what is happening around that. Everyone is trying to put the blame on the worker. Once again, the design of the driving tasks is important. From a human factors perspective, the way that you design the task will either enable or disable optimal performance from the worker. It's also about the tools and even the sequencing of the conflicting safety critical tasks. So in this case, he was using a cell phone. Is that actually the best tool that they could provide for someone who's doing such a safety critical task and executing safety critical communication? Possibly not. We also, one of the issues that emerges is the design of train protection systems, as well as warning systems in case there's a contravention in terms of how the driver should be handling the train, how the safety critical actions should be performed. In this case, the system relied on the driver as the last line of defense. And as we know, humans make errors, and especially so, humans make errors when they are put in environments where they are where their capabilities and limitations are not considered or designed for. And we also then, obviously, we've already spoken about the design of communication procedures as well as the systems. So these are just some, not all, just some of the human factors related contributory causes, which during the investigation would need to be investigated further to understand what went wrong, and therefore how could these issues be prevented, or rather how these issues could be addressed so that they don't lead to the next accident. The human factors ergonomics contributory factors in this accident, they also point to several areas where there was a mismatch between the worker and the tasks, the working conditions, and the systems that he was using. The driver was subsequently charged for homicide charges for all of the 80 homicides or the deaths that resulted. It was also reported in an article that was published in 2015 that the driver was the only person who faced charges. Initially, charges were laid against railway management and the bosses of the company. However, these were later cleared, although it was acknowledged that the safety of the line that this accident happened in could have been better. All right. What I would like to do now very quickly is just summarize what we know. We know for sure that within the South African context, and even within the railway industries in some of the African countries, that there are a lot of occurrences. What you see on the graph here is the timeline from for about the last 10 years. Starting, we're going to work backwards from the 2018-19, where we had 3,990 occurrences in the South African industry, railway industry. And what you will see is if you trace it back about 10 years, we've been stuck at around 4,000 accidents. And of course, there's fluctuations here and there. If you compare this to the UK, and yes, limited comparison because it's a country versus a group of countries and other limitations which I mentioned before. But in any case, in the UK, and they use a similar kind of safety management system requirements, and even for human factors management, we have similar kinds of standards and requirements. In the UK industry, they have about a 10th of the occurrences that the South African railway industry is experiencing. So they stuck around the 400, 500 mark. What we also know, based on the data from the rail regulator in South Africa, is that almost 2/3 of railway occurrences have been attributed to human factors related contributory causes. And this dates back to as far as 2016-17, when this was first reported. And so one would have to ask the question of, why are we having so many? What's so different about the South African railway industry? And yes, from an infrastructure, from a management perspective, there are a lot of differences. But why are we not managing human factors contributory causes? In the past, if you look at how human factors has ended up being taken up in different industries, usually providing legislation and regulations is what increases the implementation of human factors within different industries. And so I'll just take you very briefly over the legislative and regulatory framework for human factors management within South Africa. So we'll start back at the end of the timeline, around about 1993, when the OSH Act came into play, which the OSH Act requires that employers must ensure that they manage all occupational risks and protect workers from those. And although the OSH Act does not specify ergonomics, we know that ergonomic risks are an occupational issue, or then occupational risk, and therefore they are implied even in the OSH Act. If we move it forward to 2011, the Human Factors Management Standard was then introduced. So next year in 2021, it's going to be about 10 years since the Human Factors Management Standard has been in place in the South African railway industry. This standard was quite pivotal and ahead of its time in a way, because at the time already the occurrences were quite high in the country. But if we move it forward along the timeline, we see that even after 2011, when we had the Human Factors Management Standard in place, the occurrences continued to be around over 4,000. And then in 2016, one of the elements within the Human Factors Management Standard was elevated to a standard. So I think it's element number 10, which is the fatigue management element, was made into a standard, and the requirements were expanded because there was a realization that fatigue risks are so prevalent in the railway industry in South Africa, and they are not being managed adequately. So this standard was brought in. At the same time, around about the time, the occurrence management standard was also brought in. once again, if you look at the number of occurrences, they are still remaining unchanged. And then in 2018, the safety management system determination was introduced. So the safety management determination was basically an extension of your SANS 3000 safety management system standard, which details the requirements from safety management system perspective, and that is what is used when operators are applying for permits. In this SMS determination, human factors was elevated further in several ways. Firstly, there's an overarching requirement that human factors is integrated into every single aspect of the safety management system for railway operators, and that's huge. But more than that, there's an element called fitness for duty, and it literally refers operators back to the human factors management standard, because fitness for duty encompasses a lot of the elements that are stipulated in the human factors management standard. It furthermore included other aspects such as safety culture. Very explicitly, it talks about the need to manage safety culture. There's other aspects such as workload management and planning, which were previously, implicit in the requirements, but in the safety management system determination, these are made very, very explicit, which means that they need to be taken care of. And here we find ourselves again with 3,990 occurrences, which, by the way, is a slight reduction if you compare it to the previous financial year. But if you look at the long-term view, it's actually not that big of a reduction. And then last year, we had the introduction of the ergonomics regulations, which were promulgated by the Department of Employment and Labor under the OSH Act. So while the ergonomics would be implicitly covered in the OSH Act, they realized that the ergonomics issues are not being handled adequately, and therefore they brought out these regulations dealing specifically with ergonomics regulations. So then you might ask yourself, all of these regulations, all of these legal requirements, why do we still have an issue when it comes to human factors deficiencies, and why are they still leading to occurrences? And I've got a couple of ideas why this is the case. And if you would like, you can participate in the chat and maybe give me an idea of what you think some of the reasons are. Maybe you agree or you might not agree with some of the reasons that I'm providing. But essentially, one of the reasons, or one of the biggest reasons, I think the overarching reason is that the reason why occurrences are still high, and the reason why we have so many human factors related deficiencies leading or contributing to accidents, is that in the African railway industry, railway safety management systems are not in place. If they are in place, they are not documented. If they are documented, sometimes they are not fully implemented. And therefore, what you have is that the management of risks, of railway operational risks, are not managed adequately. They're not managed in a dynamic manner as they need to be. And more importantly, the reason why you're going to continue to see some of these occurrences happening is because human factors deficiencies, and there's no comprehensive way of managing them, because human factors is not yet integrated adequately into the safety management systems of railway operators. And I think this then has several repercussions or causal factors. Firstly, HFE is an emerging field in South Africa and even in the rest of the continent. So emerging when we compare it to other developed worlds and even some of the other developing nations. The implementation levels are so low when you compare it to the rest of the world. And this is despite the fact that we have legislation requiring operators to implement this. And so one of the issues then becomes that there's a lack of education and awareness of what is this human factors. What are human factors ergonomics risks, and how do these manifest in railway operations, and how do they then lead to occurrences? There's a lack of awareness around that. And I think most of it is because generally there are very, very few people who understand what this human factors is. In fact, if you were to count the number of qualified human factors ergonomics specialists in the country, there are very, very few. And I personally know only of maybe one and maybe two, maybe one, railway operator in South Africa that has hired or has in its employ qualified human factors experts, and I think some of them have joined us here. So welcome. I'm not gonna mention their names, but thank you for joining. So what we have then is that because there's a lack of education, if we bring it back to occurrences, you will also find that even when it comes to the management of occurrences, we are not investigating occurrences properly. We're not able to identify all of the relevant human factors, contributory causes, and even the methods that we are using are not equipped or are not appropriate for identifying human factors issues. But even post-investigation, some of the things like your post-accident risk assessments and the implementation of action plans, because we haven't identified the right contributory causes from a human factors perspective, even the recommendations are therefore not addressing the pertinent issues. One of the other issues is that legislation. So as I said, in South Africa, we've had legislation for almost a decade, specifically for the rail industry. Most African countries do not even have this legislation in place. And so what happens is that because the legislation is there, nothing is pushing organizations to implement ergonomics, and the consequence will be far-reaching. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's a lot of large-scale projects currently happening. What's happening? They're procuring systems, they're procuring reviving the infrastructure. And at this point, at concept stage, at design stage, they are not necessarily including human factors ergonomics requirements. And so the infrastructure, the systems that are going to be in place for the next couple of decades possibly already have human factors ergonomics deficiencies, because they are not considering the requirements of the users. They're not considering necessarily our context in terms of the management of risks and safety. And so already we need to already be inputting human factors ergonomics considerations for some of these projects that are going to have an impact for decades to come. But I don't think that's happening adequately at the moment. And so what you're also having is that the operators and in fact the industry at large, we are not learning from occurrences because we are not identifying the causal factors, and therefore recurrence is going to be high, and it will continue to be so until we find a way of curbing the deficiencies from a human factors perspective. And I think at the core of what we of a strategy to turn this around is a sustainable capacity building initiatives that will assist in addressing the gaps that I have identified. If you can think of additional issues that you might want to point out, please add them into the chat. Don't be shy. Okay, and so this is where we come in with the Railway Human Factors Ergonomics Capacity Building Program that Smart Ergonomics has initiated. So the purpose of the program is essentially to address the gaps that we have identified that have been discussed also in this presentation. So the main purpose, firstly, is that we want to assist railway operators to be able to identify, analyze, and also therefore manage human factors, ergonomics contributory factors that are contributing to occurrences in the railway industry. But we realize and recognize that this cannot be done until there's an improved awareness and understanding of what human factors is, and not just for the safety experts or the risk practitioners, but across the entire system, from the guys at the who are at the coalface all the way up to executive management level. And so the program that we have, as you'll see on the slide, is we've got two components of the program. The first one is to determine the contributory causes. And we aim to do that by, for example, analyzing past occurrences. And remember, I said that occurrences entails looking at accidents and incidents. So the idea is that we're going to start with the accidents and work through the whole safety management system so that we can also identify the incidents and the behaviors and all of that. So that's the first component of the program. And as I said, the education and awareness needs to support the capacitation of the industry, and therefore through workshops and webinars, we will also then have a second component which will then aim to provide information, skills, knowledge to safety-related grades, railway professionals and management within railway operations, so that they understand, firstly, what are the human factors contributory causes, but also in general, what is this human factors and how does it impact railway operations. So some of the activities that we will have when it comes to the first component, which is the determination of contributory causes, is that we will be developing an inventory of sorts of HFE contributory factors. And we've got a detailed plan, which we've already started working on, of how this is going to happen. This will be done at organization level, as well as in the future, we'll be able to then compare across the industry in terms of what are these human factors ergonomics contributory factors. What we will also be doing, and this is an invitation to some of the railway operators that we have here, is that as we analyze the contributory causes, we might find that there are certain themes that are recurring. So, for example, already the prevalence of fatigue risk factors is coming up in almost all of the occurrence categories. So, in Q1 of 2021, in support of the first part of this program, and basically trying to understand further how the different contributory causes actually play out in reality, we will be doing a fatigue survey within different organizations, railway organizations, participating organizations. I need to stress that participating organizations will be able to participate in or have the survey be done within their operations. Why this is important? It will give you the data to be able to understand what's happening in terms of this risk within your organization. But also, it's one of the requirements of the fatigue management standards that you need to be measuring fatigue risks. It's one of the requirements of the Human Factors Management Standard of the SMS determination. So information from this survey can be used directly to assist with compliance issues, but also more importantly with equipping the organizations to better manage this this risk. So this is just an example of the kind of work we'll be carrying out. So once we've identified the contributory causes, we will then do in-depth analyses of these, collect data where necessary and as necessary. If you look at the workshops, we will be doing, this is basically this presentation or this webinar is the first of a series where we're going to have these 3 webinars. All of them are going to be for free, as this one has been. So webinar 1 is what we are currently doing now. And then in October, the date will be confirmed and registration links will go out. The second webinar will be looking at human error in railway operations and accidents. And then the third webinar will then try to find an understanding or help operators understand the human factors integration requirements into the safety management system. And that webinar will be in November. So throughout this program, we're going to have a series of these. And this series, the first series, is literally just an introduction, which is why it's going to be for free for anyone who's not necessarily going to be part of the program, but it's open to everyone because we're still just establishing, the basic understanding of what is happening when it comes to this program. Later on, for those organizations that are going to be participating in the program, what we will also have is more directed webinars and workshops. So whatever we find from the organization in terms of the contributory factors from a human factors perspective, the training that we're going to be doing for each organization will be tailored to the risks that are identified in their operations. Okay, and so essentially the whole idea behind this webinar was firstly to raise an alarm, as it were, for everyone who is participating, who's a stakeholder in the railway industry in South Africa and the rest of Africa, to say we need to take human factors ergonomics requirements a bit more seriously, not only to solve issues from the past, but also pending some of these changes that are going to be introduced in our railway industries. We need to be able to understand what's happening, and therefore, because human factors is still an emerging field, we are, as Smart Ergonomics, trying to assist in increasing capacity when it comes to that. And so this is an invitation to railway operators to participate. So during the course of October, we are accepting applications. If an organization wants to participate, you must email info@smartergonomics.co.za. And during the month of October, we are processing applications, signing non-disclosure agreements, and establishing the rules of engagement. And then from the 2nd of November, we start doing the more in-depth work. And from that point on, with the exception of the 2 webinars that we'll be doing that are open to everyone, from that point on, we are only going to open the information, webinars, workshops to participating railway operators. It's going to be for free until the end of this financial year. So until March 2021, we are opening it up. You are going to get the benefit. As I said, one of the things that we're going to be doing is the fatigue survey. That will be done in this financial year. So if you participate, you will be able to get that done within your organization. You're going to keep the data. You're going to use the data and the information to assist with your operations and for compliance perspective, and that is going to be done for free. Of course, space is limited because we can't take every single person, every single organization. So space is limited, and there will be certain conditions in terms of, especially for the larger organizations, where they have thousands and thousands of people, we might need to limit it to certain areas only. But it is for free only until the end of March 2021. So we encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity. Thank you so much. I think we shall end it there for now. Please look out for information on the upcoming webinars that are going to be free. And if your organization would like to participate in the Rail Human Factors Ergonomics Capacity Building Program, you're welcome to contact me on info@smartergonomics.co.za. But thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Cheers.